I remember when my son was little, his only pronouns were personal pronouns. Everything was he, she. All objects in the world were he, she. And we had to teach him that non-animate objects are its. And he kind of struggled with this. I think through his eyes, the world was animated. The world was alive. This notion of the world as being composed of two genders and inanimate objects is a pretty pathetic way of taxonomizing the world. It just doesn't seem to have the richness of language that we need in order to think clearly and to act appropriately. Language shapes how we perceive the world and how we respond to it. Nature is expansive, it's mysterious, it's staggering. How are we going to get our heads and our hearts around nature? Well, we're going to do it with metaphors. A metaphor is a way of linguistically understanding the unfamiliar in terms of the familiar.
Once a bug comes in contact with DDT, he's lost. All he has to do is just walk on any pesteroid-treated surface. DDT is absorbed through the feet and spreads throughout the insect's entire nervous system. The effect is disastrous. DDT next paralyzes, then kills. In both its forms, powder and liquid, pestroid means doomsday to us insects.
Pesticides are often understood and framed in terms of defending oneself, defending one's home, defending one's crops. Common names of pesticides are often allusions to warfare or violence. The real potency of metaphor, I think oftentimes, is that we don't just speak metaphorically, we think in the metaphor. Well, if it shapes how we speak and it shapes how we think, then it's also going to shape how we act. We thought of grasshopper outbreaks very clearly in terms of the war metaphor. Outbreak is a word that we would tend to use with regard to something that's out of control. How do we understand that conflict? Well, how do we understand a lot of conflicts with something that is very numerous, that's crossing borders? Well, we understand it in terms of war. If we think of insects as being at war with us, if that's the metaphor we've adopted, we will use terms like we use with locusts, right? We fly sorties. We talk about transboundary pests. We talk about an invasion, right? So we use all the war metaphors. And then I think it's impossible not to think of them in terms of a war enemy. You want to leave none of them behind. There could be insurgents. So our actions were to use blanket applications of broad spectrum insecticides and make sure that we are approximating 100% control, which makes sense from the war metaphor. Here's what you can't do, right, as a scientist. You can't not think, speak, and act in the context of a metaphor, right? You might think objectivity is some sort of goal, but you cannot escape metaphor. Here's what you can do. You can work really hard to be keenly aware of the metaphorical structure in which you are acting, living, and understanding the world. And you can even go so far as to glimpse what is being entailed and what is being obscured, what you're not able to think and what you're being required to think. I think war is a great metaphor, but we don't take it seriously. So if we're at war, we ought to ask ourselves, is it a just war? Are you minimizing harm to non-combatants? Have you exhausted all nonviolent means? Have you goaded the enemy into violence? And it seems like the answer has to be pretty unequivocally yes. We've planted vast acreages of uniformly vulnerable plants. And historically, we've done a pretty poor job of avoiding harm to non-targets. Not only the wrong insects, but also the wrong animals entirely, and sometimes a few farm workers as well. If we starve out the birds and the wasps and whatnot, we've not done ourselves any good. And so we've improved, right? We have more target specific. It's a little bit like having moved from carpet bombing to drones. You don't come up with better ways of killing unless you're going to experience the consequences of what you have created. we're really good about outsourcing killing and dying. That was my job. I say that I was a well-paid assassin. After developing methods and whatnot, I always wanted to walk the prairie after a control program to see what was done, to feel what was done, to own what was done. And that became emotionally and spiritually exhausting at a certain point. I was not fully able to continue that work. But for the period of time, for the years in which I did it, I felt that was necessary. What does it mean to kill well? It means doing so in a way that you own and feel responsible for the killing. To kill well means that you are not planting a landmine. To live in this world means taking the lives of something. Whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or whatever, your living involves something dying. We're really good in our culture about not talking about killing and dying. To own our killing would be to become keenly aware of the killing that's done on our behalf. If the meat counter makes us at least sort of confront that something died, the produce section allows us to pretend that our food can be produced with the death of no animal lives whatsoever. At least when we get a package of meat at the store, right, we pretty much have to confront that it used to be alive. When you pick up a head of spinach, now, you don't even think about the number of animals that die in the production of plants, right? And a lot of ground nesting birds and small rodents are slaughtered in the harvest process. We don't even think about those lives, right? Let alone about the uncountable number of insects, many of which were doing no harm whatsoever, that die of neurotoxins, right, in order to protect that bunch of spinach. To be fully engaged with the natural world is to get fearful, to get disgusted, to engage in killing well, and to recognize that death is part of the game. I see that as we've provided more information to people about what they eat, right, a lot of people seem to want the information, they incorporate the information, and to some greater or lesser extent, it changes their behaviors. It suggests that the phrase ignorance is bliss is way too fast. There's a kind of aliveness that comes with tension, with improvement, with thinking, wow, I'm getting better at doing this living thing. There's all these ways for us to challenge ourselves to do the difficult things. You can make a difference. You can change the way we practice the art of killing.